game number 1. Before we dig ourselves very deep into this matchup over here, who do you think has the upper hand in this one? This is something we haven't discussed yet. Do you think DeMusliM is going to take down Mista, or are we going to see Mista moving on to the semifinals?
So the whole series then, we're talking like play styles, and this is where Mista could be a little bit frustrating to deal with because he really is your kind of oddball, right? You don't know what to expect with this guy. We've seen some remarkable stuff, and in fact, if you remember, on the previous weekend, we watched DeMusliM fall victim to Mista with the Imperial Age Rush French Night Zerg, which show you exactly the kind of curveballs this guy can throw. And I'm a little bit scared that maybe Mista has got some innovations in mind. Admittedly, they don't always work out. He's even admitted that, a mistake he made, I believe it was actually last week, was that he went into a series and he conceptualized an idea on Frisian Marshes about an hour before the game. So he had no time to practice it, and it didn't work out. And that is like his biggest value, but also his biggest weakness, right? It's a double-edged sword. Like, these strategies are phenomenal when they work, but when they don't, it's just a face palm and a GG in 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's a great point that you bring up, but that is generally a thing that can haunt any pro player. If you think about it, you have a great strategy on your mind, but even if you practice it in your scrims, you risk someone knowing about it. And that's always scary, right? Obviously, you choose your scrim partners in a way that you minimize the chance of you getting matched up against them, but at one point, you might still end up bumping into them. So sometimes, you will just have a couple of strategies that you have not shown anyone, including scrims. But that carries a danger because you might legitimately have to try it for the first time in live action, and sometimes it simply doesn't work out.
So what you're saying is you need to choose a player that never makes it to day number 2.
So everybody go practice with Core. I'm sorry.
I was trying to be subtle, man. Poor guy. You gotta be careful with this Lidakor. He has a certain amount of power now. He can legit just like tilt across to the lake and sit there and not move the camera for the next 20 minutes.
Indeed, we love Core. It's a bit of a trash talking, you know. That being said, we have on the left side Mista playing as the Abbasids in blue, and on the right side is DeMusliM in red with the Rus. Already at 335 bounty is going to get another wall for himself. 360 bounty here, no scope. That's actually pretty outstanding.
Yeah, that's pretty spicy. And considering that like the lay of the land isn't like fully registered yet, in that this is a new map. For those that haven't seen this before, it's because it's a custom map, our second custom map we've added to the rotation for the road to Red Bull Wololo. And in this map, like when you talk about things like Hy-Vee, people kind of have a good lock of where they need to go with these scouts early on. Whereas on these newer maps, it's still not like completely confirmed. It's not actually configured out correctly, or it hasn't been figured out yet. In fact, I believe midweek we had some slight tweaks to things like the mountain spawns on the side to stop the choke points from happening too much for one player. So these maps are actually in active development quite frequently, very quickly, in fact, because I've got to give credit to the custom creators here. They tend to be very fast at making adjustments. I'm not going to throw any shade elsewhere, but some other places we have to wait quite a while to get any updates.
Indeed, that is the case, although, truth be told, Relic and Microsoft have been pretty responsive when it comes to responding to map-making questions. So, from what I've heard from the map-making community, they've been very helpful making sure that map scripting is as streamlined, as easy as possible. And we're probably going to see other additional updates to the map-making tools coming up in the next couple of months, or hopefully even weeks. And it looks like DeMusliM is moving out for a boar over here. Interesting strategy, not something that we see every day on this map. You usually see the Rus just relying on fish here, but looks like we could have this full land play here from DeMusliM, because if you take a look at that right-hand side corner, there is no fish for DeMusliM. Part of the reason why many think that the Rus is so powerful on this map is because you have a lot of deep fish, and they are far away from your starting dock placement, so the fact that you don't have to carry the fish back to your dock gives an insane power to Rus fishing. But DeMusliM takes a different approach. He goes for boar-style play, and this could be dangerous for Mista because, well, this map is more about, engagements on water at the beginning rather than just going full land, and Mista could find himself exposed very easily to some land aggression soon.
I'd be surprised if he tried to aggress the lakes just because you have DAOs, and genuinely, why even try? The reason why DeMusliM is doing this, by the way, going land, is because whenever you go on the seas, the Rus, like, yeah, your point was fair. You don't have to return the boat to drop off the fish. They seemingly just get it, I don't know, airmailed back, or maybe they've got teleporters that just
It's
return
Wi-Fi.
shore.
It's
Whatever it
Wi-Fi.
is.
Just like the Daily
Yeah,
Mosques.
the Wi-Fi has the ability to upload and download fish, folks. But the issue with it is that it still costs 150 wood per load your fishing boat. That's a heavy investment at the start of the game. Whereas DeMusliM doing this allows him to unlock his aggression at a much earlier point. Also, I think actually the boar compared to the fish, you should be able to access Castle Age quicker with this build. And that's a cool option available to DeMusliM, because if you look at the spawns of the relics right now, it's hard to deny that it looks like a Roos-favored spawn here, with 3 of the relics clearly being closer to his base.
Yeah, it definitely helps here for DeMusliM. And as you pointed out, the boar, it still has a respectable getter rate, especially when you have tier 2 bounties. So you can, to a certain extent, offset the fact that you are not on water. And keep in mind that if you go for fishing, you usually delay your feudal age timing. So as you see, Mista is yet to reach feudal here, as compared to DeMusliM, who is already dropping production buildings, adding knights, adding archers. Whereas for Mista, while he does have a barracks, in fact he's going double barracks, he's yet to add anything that really deals with archers, for example.
Yeah, and it's a great point what Lidakor made there. Like, you know, if you think about it, even at tier 2 bounty, you're adding an extra 10% in the gathering rate on a 0.9 food per second boar. Well, deep water fish is actually 1 food a second. So you can actually see that you're only missing out on 0.01, and there's still that setup time of getting all the boats in the first place. Even with the additional wood you get, it's 150 wood each. And that's why he goes to this build, because he wants to block Mista out of his food eco. Think about what we've been seeing people do in Mongolian Heights more recently, where they won't go first on the dock, they wait for their opponent to do it so they can counter them out and delete the dock for them.
It's an interesting dynamic of the map for sure, and this is one of the big differences between how this map plays out in AoE 2 and AoE 4, because one thing we didn't mention is that this is a classic AoE 2 map that we're looking at, but in AoE 2 it's much more difficult to destroy buildings in Feudal Age, so it is way less likely that you're going to just go and threaten the docks with your land units. It's more about dropping a dock and fighting on water. But in this game, you have the potential to burn down those docks very easily, and that is exactly what DeMusliM is doing.
And the spear reaction coming out of Mista seems good until the archers start showing up, and then you're heavily discounted. So Mista, he'll have to find a way back in quick. He's researching the phalanx, usually a good choice, but the problem isn't really reaching here, it's staying in the fight. And if there's anything you don't want to be pushing up against the Roos, it's spears. And that's the crazy part about the dynamics of this matchup, Lidakor, is like, usually you are going to have spears in part of your composite as the Abbasids, and it's very hard to think of a game in the last month and a half that we haven't seen a Roos player pushing some archers.
Indeed. Now, behind this one, let's not underestimate the fact that Mista still has 44 eco as compared to 28, but that, of course, is going to be a little biased or just a little skewed, because some of that eco is now going to be permanently idle in the north, and that's actually very annoying. Those fishing ships aren't working, and they always show up as idols, and you can't do anything about it because you've already lost your dock. Nice walls, though, from Mista. That's going to make it much more difficult for our red player, DeMusliM here, to threaten the other dock, and still behind this one, Mista has a respectable eco lead, and that's something that DeMusliM has to be conscious about.
I would actually love to see Ben pull a village at the front line right now and wall off between the edge of the map and that wood line to the north of Mista's base, because he wouldn't be able to get back out to put the docks back up.
I would love a tower, actually. Look at this wood line here for Mista. And wooden fortresses, we have seen an increase of tower rushes with wooden fortresses recently. Imagine that you drop a tower here. You cut off Mista from all accessible wood. That would be devastating for Mista's eco.
Yeah, you will have to cover the north side as well, and the reason I quite like the idea of just getting the walls up on top of this is that right now there is a horseman push coming from Mista, and he should have a good enough eco to build up critical mass, so you need to be very careful about where you take this fight if you're DeMusliM. You can see the charge in now, horseman, targeting out the villagers on the front line. We'll move forward on top of the archers, allowing the spearmen to dive in deeper. The knights are just trying to take their time here, whittle away at the spears and force them away, and the interesting part is Mista doesn't feel like he can sacrifice any of the troops, ends up walking away with practically no damage done, and does nothing to stop the wooden fortress from going up.
That was a great fight out there for DeMusliM. Gets the tower up, barely lost a unit, and if you take a look at the battlefield, I see 1 dead archer and like 5 dead spearmen. That's a great trade out there for DeMusliM. And you see, because Mista also lost his numbers, now he cannot protect the other wood line, and suddenly Mista's sitting at 14 wood, and correct me if I'm wrong, but right now, the only type of unit that Mista can make can and will cost food and wood. So without wood, he's gonna have a troublesome time accessing any unit in Feudal Age here.
Yeah, I mean, you can build villagers, but I wouldn't advise them as fighters. That's literally all you've got.
I
You
mean, with
need wood
Abyss,
for
it's just not
everything.
that bad, but
I mean, they're cheap, right? But they're not going to last very long or do much damage. Oh, goodness. And this is the worrisome situation here. Like, Mister, he didn't try to insulate himself on the north side. He's at least got that back up. But in the process of becoming so tunnel visioned on the waterfront, you can see how DeMusliM is able to manipulate the map from that. First, by taking out the dock and then forcing him to condense himself the walls. And then, when he's drawn his attention to try to rebuild into those dock lines, it's all too easy for DeMusliM to sneak out with the villagers like he did. It's why I think that we're going to see very quick iterations of how Four Legs functions. It's not just going to be this eco boom up and me like fishing, you like fishing, let's all go to Imperial Age together. No, you're going to get a lot more plays like this in the coming weeks.
yeah, and the dynamics of this map is great from that perspective, because you might think, hey, I have super safe fish, everybody is just going to keep fishing every single game. But wait a minute, if you put up sufficient land aggression like DeMusliM, suddenly it becomes much more viable to just completely give up on fishing. And you see, for essentially the entire game, DeMusliM was behind an eco, right now is behind by 16 vills, or 16 workers. But it doesn't matter, because he's the one idling the opponent's economy, he's the one ramming down houses, burning down walls, and this land aggression, this full land aggression, caught Mista off guard to a certain extent, something that we, to a certain extent, expected upon seeing him going that heavy on the fishing department at the beginning of the game.
And I love this switch from DeMusliM now to get into spears because he saw how big the horseman count was getting. Mista did sneak out into that northern wood line because one issue with DeMuslim's composition is it's very much anchored. He doesn't want to go north-south, north-south. He just wants to strong arm a position, and that's why he's just breaching through the base. Over time, this is going to force a fight, and Mista might not be ready for it when it arrives. Like, you've maybe got 2 or 3 minutes before he's starting to wail away at your TC and the House of Wisdom, at which stage you can't ignore this any longer.
And I love how DeMusliM is dropping additional towers over here. It's much needed because right now he doesn't have the spearman numbers, and he spotted that he's already up against 22 horsemen. He needs something that can buffer up for these horsemen until the spearmen arrive in numbers, and he's yet to add the first spearman. In fact, he already has 2 on the battlefield now, but he just now finished the hardened spearman upgrade. Whereas if you take a look at Mista's army, now that's looking like a scary amount of horsemen. If Mista takes a fight in the next 1 or 2 minutes, actually less than that, probably just like 30 seconds to 1 minute.
In the next 20 seconds, I think, because when that wooden fortress comes up, it's going to be too much fortification to dive.
True. Yeah, he needs to take it down.
Yeah, it might be a little bit too late. Archer's going to back up now. Now, the cool thing about this, you mentioned he needs more spears, but the cool thing here, Lidakor, is what we've seen out of the Roost a lot is they don't actually necessarily care about the direct counter to cavalry. They care about the body blocking. That's why he's got the knights and the scouts here. They are chunky units that absorb a lot of frontal damage and delay your arrival on the archer line. And that's why Mista, even with 26 horsemen, is so hesitant to dive in on the archers.
And it's difficult, right? Because there's a lot of spearmen now as well, and you don't have a direct counter to the spearman, and you see he's trying to find an angle on the archers, but the body blocking is great here from DeMusliM. He's shielding those archers really well with the spearman and the knights, and that is just not allowing Mista to do any kind of damage to the archers. The archers haven't been hit a single time. That is how good DeMuslim's micro was here when it comes to shielding those archers with the melee units.
And just look at it, Lidakor. Look at all the horses on the ground belonging to the blue here. Mista, he's worked so hard to get these horsemen together, and it's yielding nothing right now. He's kind of stuck in a rut, and he realizes that with the final wooden fortress going up, he will call GG. DeMusliM, with the enclosing power of the Roost, opens up with a win.
Really well played here from DeMusliM. We haven't seen a ton of Rus being employed yesterday, because Rus was a commonly banned civilization on this map, but we have seen a very different Rus playstyle over here from what many would expect. Not a single bit of fishing done by DeMusliM. He went full in land aggression, and he just used the fact that by going for fishing, his opponent is going to delay his feudal age, so by the time Mista is even in a position to start making army in feudal, DeMusliM already has the numbers out there, and from that point on, it was always just that numbers advantage. 57 army on the battlefield right now for DeMusliM. Mista probably was in the 20s or at best 30s at his peak. Ultimately results in a win for DeMusliM, moves on to match point here in the quarterfinals of week number 3.